This is Ari Kaplan, and I'm speaking today with Jay Shepard, an employment litigator and creator of the award-winning blog Gruntled Employees. Jay is also the author of a new book. Hi, Jay. How are you?
I'm great, Ari. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. So, your new book is called Firing at Will, a Manager's Guide, an Unlawyerly Handbook for Management's Riskiest HR Decision. Tell us a little bit about that and your reasons for writing the book.
The most difficult job any employer or manager has is firing an employee. It's a big deal obviously for the employee. It's a major life milestone. It doesn't happen too often. And it's filled with all kinds of emotions: anger, hurt feelings, a sense of betrayal. And that's where lawsuits come from. And as I talk about in the books, lawsuits are obviously expensive, incredibly time-consuming, very distracting. And there is a way, I've learned in 17 years of representing employers and managers, there's a way to do it the right way that avoids these problems, and a way to do it the wrong way, many ways to do it the wrong way, that causes all these problems. So many employment lawsuits are avoidable with smart management.
So can you tell us a few of the tips that you're sharing with people in the book?
Absolutely. I think it's funny. Even though I'm a management lawyer and always represented companies, this is not a anti-employee book. It's very much a pro-employee book. In fact, as you mentioned, the blog, Gruntled Employees, it's the disgruntled employees who tend to sue. Keeping your employees happy is the best way to avoid having lawsuits come back at you. People don't sue people they like. They don't sue just for money. It's not a great way to make money. They sue out of anger. They sue out of sadness, out of hurt feelings. And so you treat your employees the right way throughout all their time at work, and they will like you more, and they will do better work, and they'll be less likely to sue you. And on the way out, sometimes it's inevitable. You have to fire someone. But if you do it the right way, you can lower the possibility that they will sue you.
So who's going to take the most from this book in terms of your audience?
Well, it's very much, it's not a law book. It's a management book. And so anybody who's responsible for employees, business owners, entrepreneurs, executives, managers, HR people, they'll get the most out of it. There's not case law. There's not statutes and all that. Not a lot of Latin in this book, thankfully. Not a lot of legalese. No legalese, in fact. So anybody whose job it is to manage employees, I think will learn from this, because it takes real life stories and real life decisions and shows them how they can go wrong and how they can be done right.
And so can you share with us maybe an anecdote from the book about a real life decision that really impacts how this decision is made in a good way and how this decision may be made in a way that is more adverse to the organization's interest?
Sure, absolutely. One of the themes throughout the book is that companies get themselves in trouble when they come up with all these policies, when they hyper-legislate the workplace. And they have these detailed employee manuals and all these policies like progressive discipline. And one of the things I always advocate is I want them to be free. I don't want them to tie their own hands. So there's a story in the book of a real case where a guy was working for a Dunkin' Donuts franchise at Logan Airport in Boston, and he mouthed off to a customer who stormed off all upset, and then they fired him on the spot, which makes sense. It's pretty reasonable. And he sued over this, and his lawyer pointed out that they had this special, they had 11 things that could get you summarily fired, and they didn't include mouthing off to a customer. And so as a result, because they didn't follow their own policy, they ended up in litigation for more than 3 years and spent over $100,000 and then had to settle the case. The case went way up through the court system. So here, had they not had this silly policy, they could have just fired him as an at-will employee. So they took away their own ability to shape their workforce and to control it.
So you talk about this idea of progressive discipline and performance appraisals, for example, as being ineffective. So many people are using these techniques, and they seem to have been proven over time. Why now? Why? And maybe it's the market, but why do you think that these ideas are less effective?
Well, I'll disagree that they're proven over time. I think if you asked around, you wouldn't find anybody who got any true value out of something like an annual performance review. I mean, think about that. How crazy is this, that you're going to wait 10, 11 months, 12 months to tell somebody, hey, Mary, you're doing a great job. I mean, that's not that's not an effective management technique. The problem with these policies and with these conventional things like employee handbooks and progressive discipline policies and annual performance reviews is that they become a substitute for real management. Management is every day talking to your employees and knowing what's going on and being there for them and saying, hey, how's it going? How's it going on this job? And helping them with their problems as they arise and telling them they're doing a good job when they're doing it and correcting them when they're not doing a good job then and there. All too often, managers end up falling back on this framework that's been put into place that makes them not really have to manage. And so you end up with these, annual reviews that don't say anything, satisfactory, satisfactory, satisfactory. And then the person gets fired for bad performance. I've seen that blow up in court where all of a sudden the plaintiff's lawyer pulls out the file and says, look at all this, satisfactory. How could this be a bad employee? Well, because they were a bad employee, but the forms and the paperwork don't show it.
So are you suggesting in some way that we're going paperless in terms of how we're evaluating and sort of guiding our employees?
Well, it's interesting. Paper is another smaller theme in the book is I talk about paper a lot. On the one hand, yes, I think there is a tendency to write things that like performance reviews and policies and manuals that I think is bad, that I think gets in the way of good management. People write these memos, and they'll do a written warning and they'll have a place for the employee to sign. And I've seen hundreds of times, I'll look through a file later on when there's a lawsuit, and it will say employee refused to sign. Well, of course the employee refused to sign. No one's going to sign something implying that they actually agree with it. And it turns into it makes it a formality that gets away from the real world. On the other hand, the other side of the coin, I talk about the magic of paper and writing things down. And the difference between, if you were in a lawsuit, you were the manager, Ari, and you fired somebody years ago, and then you're on the stand and the lawyer asks you, well, did you talk to Joe about this? And you're like, yeah. And then, when? Well, it was a few years ago. I don't know. It was warm out. Whereas if you had taken some notes in your management file, you could say, yes, I talked to him on June 22nd at 2 in the afternoon in conference room B. That's a lot more believable. And a jury or a judge is going to believe that it happened because you wrote it down. So paper cuts both ways. And I talk about how managers and HR folks can better use paper for the good things and avoid using them for the bad things.
And yet in the book, you include helpful samples to draft job letters, severance agreements, employment agreements. What is the nature of those documents?
I do, you're right. I include some samples, and then there's a companion website also where people will be able to download them. But it's not a substitute for an employer's relationship with their employment lawyer. These are just some ideas, more stylistic, to let them know. So many offer letters and employment agreements, if you have to have one, and things like that, are so lawyerly. And I use that as a criticism. It's not, lawyerly to me is not a good thing. Lawyers tend to write, as you know, Ari, in this obtuse, turgid, formalistic way that you read and you're like, I don't even know what this says. And
that's my pen name, by the way. Obtuse, turgid Ari.
Exactly, turgid Ari. And I heard that about you. I wondered. And HR people do the same thing because they see it. They talk to employment lawyers and they're like, oh, well, I need to make this more formal. But people in the real world don't operate that way. And so when you see our samples, my samples, the offer letters, it's plain English. Hey, Bob, we're excited you're coming. Let me tell you a little bit about the job. Even the severance letter, if you have to fire somebody and you want to pay them severance so they won't sue you, you could do a very formalistic agreement that they're going to be, I don't even understand this, I got to go to my lawyer. which we don't want. I mean, you have to tell them you should talk to a lawyer, but you don't actually want them to talk to a lawyer. If you make it very readable and accessible, they'll read and go, okay, I get this, I give up that. Yeah, I'll sign, and they sign. So it's much more for stylistic purposes. The document, I don't want anybody cutting and pasting these documents and just giving them out without having their own employment lawyers look at them. That would be silly.
So let's close with a couple of best practices that you're suggesting to your audience of employment executives and those in the various industries that are hiring and firing. And of course, we don't want them to do the riskiest thing you can do at work with your clothes on. So what are some, which was a tagline I really think is very catchy, but what are some of the things that you'd suggest in some that people keep in mind?
Well, I talk a lot about, if you go back and you want to avoid having to fire people in the first place, you need to hire well, and you need to hire thoughtfully. And so you want to try to obviously right now you're stuck with the people that you have, but going forward, you want to pay attention to hiring the right people, the people who believe in what your company believes in, and who are going to be there not just for a paycheck, who are going to be there because they feel like they're part of, that something about your company speaks to who they are, and so that they can be proud of being, I want to be at Zappos, I want to be at Apple, I want to be at Starbucks, or whatever or XYZ law firm. So getting the right people is critically important. When you've got the people there, being a hands-on manager, not a micromanager. It's very important that you let your employees have autonomy and that them feel like their work matters and that their say matters. There's a tendency to have a lot of rules and regulations, and you have to do it this way. And people don't respond well to that. They get bored. After a while, if you tell them step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and on and on and on, after a while, they're just drones. And drones don't tend to be good employees. Whereas if you say, listen, here's our goal, go do that. And I'll give you guidance, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You do it yourself. People get more excited. They get to tap into their creativity. And then when you have to fire somebody, you have to do it the right way. It takes a lot of thought. It's extremely stressful. I've fired people, unfortunately, more times than I'd like. And I've certainly counseled thousands of managers and HR folks and employers on how to fire people. And it's very difficult. You lose sleep over it. Obviously, it's harder for the employee getting fired, but it's hard for you. You need to be constantly aware of the emotional reaction that you're going to be causing. Do it right, and you can let the person leave with their head held high. They're not going to be happy, but they'll feel that they retain their dignity. And I talk about retained dignity as the critical concept in this. The greater retained dignity they leave with, the less likely they will be to sue you.
This is Ari Kaplan speaking with Jay Shepard, a colleague of mine and the author of Firing at Will, an Unlawyerly Handbook for Management's Riskiest HR Decision. Jay, thanks so much. Best of luck.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you very much.